There is a particular kind of exhaustion that comes not from doing too much, but from trying to control too much. You know the feeling. It arrives somewhere around 2 in the morning, or in the middle of a conversation you cannot quite focus on, or in the quiet after everyone else has gone to sleep. The mind begins to work. The possibilities unfold. What could go wrong? What might already be going wrong? What you should have done? What you still need to do? The mental rehearsal begins. The contingency planning, the loop. Anxiety is not weakness. It is the mind doing what it was designed to do, scanning for threats, preparing for outcomes, trying to create safety through foresight. The problem is not the scanning. The problem is the belief underneath it, that if you think about it long enough, carefully enough, you can prevent the worst. That control is the same thing as safety, that the right preparation can keep the future from being what it will be. It doesn't work. You already know that. And the not working is what keeps the loop running. Peter was a man who worked with his hands. He was a fisherman on the Sea of Galilee, a body of water that could shift from calm to violent without warning. He knew how to read weather, how to manage a boat, how to work a net in the dark. He was the kind of man who trusted what he could measure, what he could hold, what he could manage with his own skill. That was not a flaw. It was the nature of the work. In a boat, in a storm, competence is the difference between going home and not going home. He was also impulsive, loud, someone who spoke before he thought and acted before he was ready. When Jesus walked toward them across the water in the middle of the night, in the middle of a storm, every other person in the boat stayed in the boat. Peter said, "If it's you, tell me to come." That is a very particular kind of courage, and a very particular kind of control. Not the control of waiting, of patience, of trust, but the control of doing something, of moving, of making himself part of whatever was happening, rather than watching from the hull. He stepped out, he walked, and as long as his attention was on Jesus, the surface held. And then he looked at the wind, he looked at the water, he looked at the evidence all around him that this was not something a person should be able to do, and he began to sink. The text says he was afraid. That is the word. He saw the wind and was afraid, and he began to sink. Not because the conditions changed. They were the same storm they had been 2 seconds before. Not because something new went wrong. Because he moved his attention from the one thing holding him to all the things that should have been sinking him. Anxiety does exactly this. It is not usually the actual problem that breaks us. It is the moment we look away from the one steady thing and begin cataloging the evidence against safety. The mind floods with data, the symptoms, the numbers, the history, the possibilities. And the more data, the more the surface feels like it is giving way. Peter cried out, "Lord, save me." And immediately, that is the word the text uses, immediately, Jesus reached out and caught him and said, "Why did you doubt?" Not, "Why were you afraid?" Not, "The storm wasn't real." Not, "Your fear was unreasonable." Just, "Why did you doubt?" The question assumes something important. It assumes that what Peter had already seen, the walking, the holding, the evidence of something trustworthy, was enough. Not enough to make fear impossible, enough to choose trust anyway. The Garden of Gethsemane. If you want to understand what it costs to choose trust over control, start here. This is not a story about someone who found peace easy. This is not composure. This is not a man untouched by what was coming. The text says he was deeply grieved, even to death. He went further from the disciples and fell on his face. He prayed, "My Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me." This is the prayer of someone who would have chosen differently if choosing were his to do. This is not performance. This is a man on his knees in the dark asking for another way. And then, "Nevertheless, not as I will, but as you will." That sentence is not resignation. It is not the absence of fear. It is the presence of trust underneath the fear. It is the choice, not the feeling, the choice, to place what is coming into hands that are larger than the outcome. It is the refusal to let anxiety do what it always promises, give you control by keeping you in the loop forever. He prayed this 3 times. 3 times he came back to the same place, not because the first 2 didn't take, but because trust is not a single decision. It is a returning. a choosing again in the same dark garden to release the thing you cannot hold anyway. Control is not safety. This is what anxiety is built on. The belief that the right amount of planning, the right level of vigilance, the right preparation can make the future safe. That if you worry correctly, the worst won't come. That the loop is keeping you ahead of something. But the future is not made safe by being controlled. It is made bearable by being trusted. Not trusted to go the way you would choose, trusted to be held by something larger than your own foresight. The way Peter trusted when he stepped out and the water held. The way Jesus trusted in the garden when he said, "Not my will," and meant it. Anxiety wants you to be God, to know what is coming, to prevent all harm, to be responsible for every outcome. But you are not God, and the exhaustion you carry is partly the weight of a role you were never supposed to fill. There is a specific moment in Peter's story worth sitting with. After he sinks, after Jesus catches him, after they get back in the boat, the text says the storm stopped. The disciples worshiped and said, "Truly you are the Son of God." The storm stopped, but it stopped after. Not before the fear, not before the sinking, after. The peace did not arrive before the evidence warranted it. It arrived because of what had already proven itself trustworthy. That is how it works in a life shaped by anxiety. The peace does not come before the unknown resolves. It comes from having accumulated enough evidence of what holds, enough return mornings, enough storms that passed, enough moments where the surface held longer than it should have, to trust the thing you cannot control. Not because the fears were wrong, not because the worst never comes, but because the holding is real, and you have seen it, and you can choose to look at it instead of the wind. You are not anxious because you are broken. You are anxious because you are trying to carry the future with your own hands, and the future is too heavy. The peace on the other side of anxiety is not the peace of certainty. It is not a resolved question or a guaranteed outcome. It is the peace of a hand that does not let go, even in the moment you stop looking at it and start looking at the storm. That peace is not earned by worrying less. It is found by trusting more.